So the talk today is what I've learned in 3 years as an USHPA observer. I'm going to talk about me and my background, how I got here, what is an observer appointment, and what is their job? How do you become an observer? My operating principles, what a typical observer day looks like for me, and I'll cover some war stories and then I'll open it up to questions. All right, so many of you know that I actually had a dual career. I have both a military and a civilian career. I was in the Air Force Reserve for 20 years, of which about 4 years I did active duty, of which I did 4 years active duty time. My career field was a air transportation specialist, and I retired at the rank of tech sergeant. And there's a big story for that, but I'll tell that another time. In that process, I held a variety of training jobs, and that's important later. But along with that, I did vehicle operations. So basically, I was a military driving instructor, and that we're not talking just about cars and trucks, but we're talking like heavy vehicles and forklifts and other specialized equipment. I was also a sail-fae buddy care instructor, which also came in really handy later, where you learn how to treat simple or basic injuries and do basic emergency medical care. I was also a military funeral honors instructor. So those of you who have ever seen a military funeral where you're doing 21 gun salutes and carrying caskets and folding flags, I did that for 1 year as a full-time staff member, but 7 years in total. And then the last few years, I was a development and training flight instructor. So my job was to make sure that people that were enlisted but ready to go to basic training, make sure they're physically and mentally prepared. So making them do push-ups, running them around a track, doing drill and ceremony, a lot of academic stuff, I taught a lot of US history and civics as well. And then computer operations, of course. Civilian, 27 years in information technology. Right now I'm a solutions architect for HP Enterprise. I'm also a private pilot. I have 180 hours total time, mostly in tailwheel aircraft because that's my preference. I'm at about 70 hours piloting command. I also have 7 years and 179 hours as a hang glider pilot. I learned at the local Mission Soaring Center. In addition to that, and we were talking about this in the free talk period, that I've been in model aviation for 30 years, specifically radio controlled. Right now, I'm an USHPA mentor, and I've also got, the only thing left for me to do is my basic instructor evaluation, and I'll be eligible to be a basic instructor. I've also done a wide variety of martial arts. My family style is specifically Kendo/Iaido, so the sword arts, but I've also done some Filipino martial arts, and I've done a little bit of judo and a little bit of mixed martial arts here and there, but I'm not currently doing any of those because I don't think I'm physically up to it anymore. I started hang gliding back in 2013. A bunch of friends took a Groupon for a hang gliding lesson. I thought, oh, well, that looks really cool. I'll go with them. I'd seen hang gliding before when I lived in San Diego, but I never really did anything with it. They got their half price lesson at Mission Soaring Center, and I paid full price. So they stopped after one lesson. I kept going. Later on, I met up with Robert Booth, who at the time was the president of the Wings of Regalo and a regional director. And I got to know him on a hang gliding trip to Dunlap when he did a really, really outstanding ground school on Dunlap and flying there and landing there and the like. And later on, when my wife started flying hang gliders, I had her go get her hang 2 with Robert because I liked how he taught certain things. And it pretty much got wrapped up into helping him do a lot of tasks. Not so much the training, but the logistical stuff, making sure people got where they needed to go and making sure that they had everything that they need to have. And then later on, I got to the point where I'm launch marshaling people, i.e. setting up launch with a bunch of people and throwing them off the mountain while he's down at the bottom evaluating people's landings. So we sort of tag team his operation. The majority of Masayo's class, frankly, really got into the groove of how things are supposed to work in terms of hang gliding. During the course of that, I looked into programs and appointments where my military and my civilian background would have where I'd have the best fit of the skills and the experience that I had. What I wanted to do was find the best mix. I found that the Observer program probably made the most sense in terms of what I was capable of doing, what my experience level was, and some of my background, and where I could make the best contribution. Masayo's class had 4 people: VJ, Eric Walker, John Grimish, and then her. And I really wanted to make it a point to get all 4 of these people to hang 3, and I was able to do that. So the good part is it looks like all 4 are obviously my wife is still flying, Eric and VJ are still flying, and John is flying occasionally. Being able to get them to hang 3 sort of made sure that we kept them around as pilots. All right, so what is an observer? I'm not going to read the SOP for you. The SOP is right here. I highly recommend that everybody download it and read what everybody's roles are, the examiners, the observers, and the like. But in a nutshell, observers are there to help establish proficiency for flying sites. They're set to proctor written tests, observe spot landings, and issue certain skills up to, but not including any of the towing skills. And why do observers exist? The reason why the observer program exists is to cover areas where there's a lack of instructors. So there's a lot of things in both the USHPA rules and a lot of site rules that have a lot to say about you either need an observer or an advanced instructor to conduct certain operations. What that means is observers actually have a lot of authority and a lot of latitude in terms of how they do their job. But what they're not empowered to do is basically do a lot of training. We're really there just to fill the holes in the supervisory role in terms of flying and keeping things safe. Cool part about being an observer is I can issue H3 and H4. So I'm in H4, I can issue everything up to my level. Including skills like flat slope launch and windy cliff launch and all that. And I think there's a couple of people on here that I've either issued ratings to or have at least proctor tests for. So how do I become an observer? So once again, referring to the SOP, I'm not going to read it for you, but the basic requirements, and Bailey, this is why I made the comment to you earlier. You have to have your hang free for rating for at least a year. You must be appointed by an examiner for your area, of which ours is Paul Ghazi's. Typically, there's a seminar given by the examiner and some practical instruction as they see fit. My personal observer class consisted of, we went through the regulations, went through the site, the Ed 11 site regulations, the USHPA regulations, and then we went up to the top of the mountain, observed conditions, talked through a typical site orientation, talked to Paul and Carl Almendinger, basic procedure behind doing site orientations and observing for people. We launched a couple of people off the mountain, and then I was given my appointment. Okay, so my operating principles. A lot of this is basically taken straight out of my military career. Number 1, do not take anyone's word for anything. Look it up, see it in writing, and verify it for yourself. So I had a couple of examples where somebody told me that their USHPA was current, and I look and I find out that it's not current. So a good example is the last couple of years I'd be taking big crews up to the top of the mountain. Beforehand, I would get a list of names and I would crawl the entire list of people to see if their USHPA was current and see if their ratings were appropriate. The other one is take whether somebody has their gear in order for granted. So a typical NCO sergeant type thing is everybody gets out their deployment bag and holds up their set of socks and holds up their underwear and holds up their gas mask and their eyeglass inserts. And I sort of taken to doing that on trips up the mountain at Ed 11 as well. I'll make sure people have their harnesses, their helmets, the appropriate paperwork, the ratings, the cards, make sure their glider's in order, make sure all their safety equipment is in order, make sure they have food and water. Along with that above, read the regs yourself. One thing you don't want to do is, along with not taking anyone's word for it, it's not just about whether it's people's skills or their abilities and all that, that you don't want to take for their word for it, but you don't want to take anybody's word for what the regulations say. And the reason why you don't want to do that is at the end of the day, you're going to be responsible for following those regulations, and you're going to be responsible for enforcing those regulations. So every time I've made a mistake and I've taken somebody's word for it, I've gotten bit because it turns out the regulation says something different than what they said it says. So if you're responsible for it, crack the book and look it up yourself and make sure that you understand what's in the regulation yourself, right? Flip side, you might find people that are interpreting the regulation more stringently than it needs to be interpreted, or they may not be interpreting it stringently enough. So the only way to know that for sure, and most, like say club regs, are written in readable language, not legalese. Crack the reg yourself and look at it. There's a military axiom: the amateur study tactics and the professional study logistics. That applies here too. So everybody is worried about flying and flying techniques and all that kind of stuff, but I gotta tell you, on most hang gliding trips that I've seen, the logistics are way more of a problem than anything else. You have people forgetting base bars. You have instructors forgetting base bars for gliders. You have people not bringing enough water, not bringing enough food, not bringing this needed supply or that needed supply. Showing up to the LZ with a car that's not up to spec. They show up to the LZ with not enough gas in the tank. If you want to find yourself in a difficult spot, yeah, go ahead and concentrate on the trip and don't worry about the logistics. But if you want a successful outing, make sure that you focus on that stuff too. And maybe that's outside of the direct purview of an observer, but I found the more you think ahead and the more you try and cover all these bases, the better off you're going to be and the more successful you're going to be at it. Because I gotta tell you, I mean, just getting people to look after themselves is a challenge. And even when you feel like you have all your ducks in a row, you'll find that you'll have forgotten something. And if everybody is doing that and everybody is making sure that the logistical challenges are being met, if you fall on your face and you forget something that that's not absolutely critical, you'll find that you'll have enough amongst you that to cover most situations. But if you don't think about this stuff at all, you're going to get on site and you're going to have a difficult time. To me, being an observer, being an instructor, being a mentor is really about leadership. What I found is that everybody has their idea of what a leader is in their mind, but in reality, there's many kinds of leadership. There is the kind of push button, move things from here to there type mechanical leadership, and then there's the charismatic types, right, where they use their personality to pull people along. Whatever it happens to be, when you take on a leadership role, part of the challenge is just figuring out what your leadership style is and really working that to its hilt. Okay. Along with that, you can't be a good leader without being a good follower. So not only are you in a leadership position over others, but part of being a good leader is learning how to lead from other people who are sort of ahead of you on the value chain. I don't know of a single senior leader in any organization that doesn't have somebody that they talk to about, at least to bounce problems off of or to act as a sounding board. But even I know plenty of 4-star generals that have leadership mentors for what they do as well. 9 times out of 10, they happen to be other older 4-star generals. But nobody knows the job straight off the bat. And every time you go up a level in terms of complexity and in terms of the difficulty of the operation, the more important those mentors become. The better you study those people, the better leader you're going to be yourself. Okay, so what does a typical observer day look like for me? So most USHPA sites allow hang twos to fly, but they have a clause in their club rules that say either a certain number of flights or certain conditions have to be supervised by an advanced instructor or observer, right? Ed Levin's a perfect example. So like your first 10 flights off the top or your 10 flights off the 600 have to be supervised by advanced instructor or observer, right? So I do a lot of site orientations, and that's the full site orientation. You walk the LZ, you walk the launches, you talk about conditions, all that kind of stuff. The more places you got to do it, the more expertise and the more notes you have to pile up. Launch marshaling. So launch marshaling is exactly what you're seeing in the picture here. And quite a few of the people on the talk have been through, one of our mass launches, like on an unsoarable sled ride day at Ed Levin, where we'll pile up 6 or 7 gliders, we'll get everybody together, and we'll go through everything. So we'll walk the conditions, set up the gliders, then we'll get up to launch, we'll pile everybody up at launch, and we'll do our pre-launch checks just like we're seeing here, like I'm doing for Javier right now, where you check everybody's harnesses, check all the gliders. If they're if they're inexperienced, then I'll, in addition to their pre-flight, I'll do my own pre-flight, because sometimes I'll discover things like gliders being misassembled, or harnesses being put in wrong, or leg loops not on, or carabiners not latched, or helmets not latched. So launch marshaling is all those things, helping people decide what cycles to pick, whether the launch cycle is safe or not. That's essentially launch marshaling in a nutshell. Making sure that the 6 to 8 seconds that launch happens goes safely. Assessing conditions, like we talked about, making sure that it's not too gusty, that it's not too thermic. Then also observing spot landings. So hang 2, 3, and 4 require spot landing tasks. So people will launch, fly, grade whether they actually made the landing or not. In addition, at Ed 11, I have my rack. It's very common for us to be driving people back and forth between the 300 and the LZ, so that we could get multiple trips down. But spot landings can be observed pretty much anywhere according to the regulations. And again, you can read what those are. Helping study for written tests, and we've done that here in the fledglings group, right? So we've done our share of helping people study for the Hang 2, 3, and 4 tests. Then we also are empowered to proctor those tests. So I'll issue the test. So Bailey is a pretty good example. He took his Hang 3 test with me. Same thing with John Kelly and a few other people. So that is, take the test, grade it, and pass or fail. If you fail, then there's a review period that you have to go through. Observing rating tasks, so that there's a bunch of tasks that are above and beyond the spot landings for, say, Hang 4. So observing those tasks. Providing moral support, and then keeping things moving. That goes back to logistics. You see a logistical problem, something that can cause a hiccup in the operation. Try and stop punch it. Try and figure out what the problem is going to be, and try and get ahead of the situation before it actually becomes a problem. Right? The whole idea is to keep the whole process moving smoothly. The more smoothly an operation runs, the less stress you have, the more mental focus you can devote to the flying. And then, of course, there's safety. And I got to tell you, everybody will do their best, but I don't know anybody who has a perfect safety record. There's always going to be a little something. Obviously, the fewer the better, and you're trying to keep things as safe as possible, and that is your job. But expecting that you're going to have a perfect record there is pretty tough. All right, so we're going to talk about some war stories. And when I say war stories, it's sort of like practical application. And at this point, if people want to jump in and ask questions, feel free to do so. I'll let people unmute as they feel necessary. The red lettering is just notes for me regarding each item. Okay, so launching people into conditions they weren't adequately prepared for. I had a situation where I had an instructor hand me somebody and say, hey, this person's already flown off the top. They're already pretty good to go. Do you want to take them up for a second run? Well, I did. I took them up for a second run. I threw a bunch of other people off. It was a mildly soarable day that day. I took the instructor's word as to what this person's skill level was before I sent them off. I sort of gave them an initial evaluation. I wanted to see if they could balance and ground handle and all that. And I figured that would give me a window into what their actual overall ability was. Well, that turned out to be a big mistake. This person didn't get hurt. It wasn't really a serious incident in the sense that there was any measurable or damage or injury, but they scared themselves pretty good. They got themselves basically back behind the 300 behind the trees and managed to sort themselves out and fly out and land in the LZ, but they promptly quit the sport. So that was a couple of things. That was, I made a mistake in my assessment of the conditions in the sense that it shouldn't have been soarable at all for their first 10 flights off the top, not going up at all. It should have been a very strongly inverted day. But what I found is that for the low number of flights that they had, even though the instructor had a high assessment of what their skill was, it turns out that they were definitely not up to it. And it turns out they also had some other equipment problems that I found out about later. So the big lesson there is don't take people's word, even other instructors, for where people are at in their training. If you're not sure, put them through the full skills assessment. And I've done this before. If I don't know somebody and I just met them, I don't know anything about them, I don't know how they fly, I've literally taken people from the 50 and then progress them up through the entire set of launches at 11 until they satisfied me in terms of where their skill was at. The other one is the person that was in question that scared themselves out of the sport. They were flying sort of half prone and half upright and really had a hard time controlling the glider. Had I known that there was some issue in terms of how the gear was set up and how they were using it, obviously I wouldn't have made those decisions, but if I had done like a full assessment, I wouldn't have run into that problem, right? The best thing there would have been just to take them through, make people sort of earn their credibility with you. And it's not an ego thing, right? It's not that process is not there to stroke your ego. That process is there to help them build trust in you and you build trust in them, right? Okay, judging people's mental condition. I'm sorry.
So I have a question for you, Takeo.
Yeah.
So have you ever used student videos as part of your evaluation of working with a pilot for the first time? And your comments about that and how valuable that information?
That is an excellent question, Clark. And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. If somebody has a video of them flying, preferably I will access that before we even show up for that day. It's just like everything else. You really study that person, what their hand transitions are like, where their eyes are looking, what their launches are like, if they get nervous, are they grippers? Do they approach too slowly? Do they approach too fast? How is their overall control of their glider? Video is an incredibly valuable tool that I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. But I personally use a video a lot. I mean, I do mean a lot. And not just for everyone else's performance evaluation, but for my own as well. A lot of you know that like I post a tremendous amount of video, but all that video passes in front of my eyes before I do anything. And most of the time I'm watching either my own or my wife's videos extensively for how I approached a certain situation and how that worked out and drawing lessons and all that. So I apply that same process. The same process I apply to myself is the same process I apply to other people when I'm in this situation. If I have like an extensive library of student video, certainly that saves me from having to go through like a laborious, time-consuming, physically demanding total evaluation from the 50 all the way up through the 1750. You know, you can glance at most videos and see whether somebody is good to go or not. So yes, I think it's valuable. I use it a lot. And that's both onboard and external video. And that's both takeoff and landing. Does that answer your question, Clark?
Yes, thank you. It's important for them to hear that because it's a big time saver if they really want to fly from the 1750 and we've never seen them fly before.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so judging people's mental condition. This goes along primarily with launch marshaling, but it can really go through at any part of the day. At the beginning, it's not so obvious, like you're throwing gliders on trucks and the like. It's not that obvious what people's mental condition is. I can tell you there's one thing that's extremely obvious, and that is if somebody is fatigued. So if somebody is tired, you take a red Post-it note mentally and you stick it on their forehead and you watch that person very carefully. In your case, as an observer or as a supervisor or as a trainer or as any kind of leader, if you see fatigue, you must pay attention to that. That is automatically a red flag. If somebody looks sleepy, they look tired, they look lethargic, and before you head up the mountain, you keep a special eye on them, right? And if you think that somebody is not in a mental condition to fly, you tell them as early in the process as possible, okay? But launch marshaling, everybody's off the trucks, they're set up their gliders, they're walking up to launch. I've literally had somebody walk up to me and they're with their glider hooked in, ready to go, ready to do their hook and check. And I look in their eyes and say, you need to go to the back of the line and chill out. You have to make sure that the person that you tell understands this is not a punitive action. You're not trying to punish them. What you're trying to do is make sure that they are in a good mental spot. So go back to that example. I've had somebody literally walk up to me and their eyes are wobbling, right? And I've told them, get off of launch, put your glider down, sit down on the ground and calm down. Because somebody in that mental state is not going to perform well in the middle of the fight, right? The middle of the most stressful part of the entire flight, i.e. the launch. Okay. So keep a close eye for these kinds of things. And it's hard for me to say like how to figure out how to learn how to do that. Probably the only way I can think of to do that is just to do it. Anybody who's coached any kind of sports, who's participated in sports, has been in the military, has done any of this kind of extreme stuff, knows when somebody's mental state is not correct. Okay. And if you're not sure and you want to become an observer, or you want to take on more of a leadership role in the sport, and you're not sure about how to spot these things, then by all means, stick with somebody who's already been doing it and look for what they look for. This goes back to being a good leader, being a good follower, right? So stress, anxiety, distraction. I've had a report of potential substance abuse. So I found, and after the fact, of course, I did not know at the time that these people may have been using. And at the time, I did not have any evidence that they were, so I couldn't pursue any legal action against them. But I had a report of somebody who performed quite poorly, that the fact that they may have been under the influence of something. That person I have not seen fly since, and I plan to never observe or supervise them again, because that is just beyond the bounds of logic. But these are things that you have to look for. Oh, in addition to stress, anxiety, distraction, and fatigue, illness is another one, right? So a great thing that I would say is good to bring over from private aviation or from general aviation is what's called the I'm Safe checklist. So I'm not going to spell it out for you. I encourage everybody to Google that. The literal word I'm safe, the way it's written right there, all is one word. So look that up and make sure that you understand what that's all about. And you really should be going through that checklist internally, right? Whether you're going to be good to go or not. But when you're in a leadership position, then you can apply that I'm safe checklist to other people.
Oh, hey, it's Chris Inglesby. I just
Sure.
wanted to kind of jump in on this because, I think mental condition, yeah, absolutely observers need to do it, but, students should also be, tutored by their instructors on knowing if they have game on and they're ready to go as opposed to it. And then, two examples that I can give is, my son Colin, who's 16, and he's currently learning.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of had a full day on the training hills, and towards the end of the day, his instructor realized, wow, Colin's kind of cooked. It's time for him to kind of, be done with it. And it was a good lesson. He kind of talked to him about it, and
Mm-hmm.
and my 16-year-old actually kind of realized it and said, yeah, that's perfect. And for me personally, also, I mean, every once in a while, I have a problem with insomnia, and so I was planning to go to Ed Levin last weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and ended up only getting a few hours of sleep. And even though I really wanted to go out, it was just drilled into me. No way am I going to do that.
Yeah.
So really good for instructors to kind of drill into their students that they have to be aware of their own mental condition as well.
That is an outstanding comment, and the reason why I think it's outstanding is the particular demographic that you pointed out. Young men do not know when they are at the edge of their performance.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I can tell you this, having coached, having direct life or death control over a generation of young men and women. It's not just young men, but young men are by far the worst. Young people do not understand like when they are at their edge. They are so strong and so energetic and so powerful in terms of their physical ability that they don't understand that when they're where they're at their mental limit. Okay. And that is your old sergeant's job to rein that in and pull on the rope and tell people like, hey, like you need to back off. And you are absolutely correct. The unfortunate part is the particular demographic your son belongs to, I would say the 18 to 22-year-olds or the 16 to 22-year-olds, you can tell them they're not necessarily going to listen. You have to tell them, no, you're not going. That's just the end of it. That you have to hand out the orders. When you get out, when you get dealing with people older, then it's like, okay, then you talk to them and you sort of coach them. What I found is that demographic, you you put the restriction on and you sort of explain later, and eventually they sort of figure out that like, oh yeah, I'm not doing so hot right now. Okay.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. It is very important when you're, especially we're dealing with young men, but it also applies to young women. And that is you got to know exactly when to put the screws on and lock it down, because discipline is the one thing that they lack, and it's the one thing that they need the most. And you know, I mean, it's not a negative thing. It's they will certainly thrive under it. Your son certainly had a good lesson, and that's a better lesson to learn than when you're on the ground and holding an arm because you broke it through from a swing through whack, right? So yeah, assessing your own condition is just as important. Having other people teach you how to assess that condition is important, just the same way as it was for both you and I would imagine, right? So yeah, very, 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 very important. So yeah, Google I'm Safe checklist and look that up, and I encourage everybody to sort of go through that. It's kind of mechanical, it's kind of basic, but most people don't do it or they don't know how to do it.
Hey, Takeo, I have a couple of things to add if you don't mind.
Sure.
To go now or later? Kind of
go ahead.
What we were discussing. So as the observer, I think there are a couple of more important points to make. One is the social pressure. So basically, when you have a bunch of people, and like you said, some people could not be mentally ready for that reason, right? But all the other guys, their buddies, someone who flew with them and trained with them, they are flying and they're ready. But that one person is not. So
okay, I see where you're going. Continue.
Basically, that person gets a social pressure, or even explicitly or implicitly. By saying, hey, we're gonna have, all of us are going to have fun, but that one person is not ready. Or just kind of poking, you know, some people are cocky, they are just poking, hey, like, are you afraid to fly and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you probably had a lot of cases in your career. So yeah, if you can cover that part,
sure.
How as the observer you handle the social pressure?
That is an excellent point. So how I deal with it, and you may or may not have heard me say this, is when I start my day briefing, the morning safety brief or the pre-operation brief, I tell people, like, you are not required to launch. Launching is completely optional. If you are not ready to launch or you are not able to launch, there should be no penalty for that, socially or otherwise. You need to do your own assessment and know yourself. And if you are not in a condition to launch and everybody else thinks that you are, then you need to step off of launch. And as an observer or as a leader, yeah, I am there to support you in that decision. And I've had that happen. I've had that happen many, many times, where somebody would walk up and be like, yo, like, this isn't working for me today. And it's like, okay, cool. Hey, go ahead and step aside. Let me get all these other people off and we'll get you taken care of. You're right. That is an important point. And to make sure that everybody understands that, like, this, at the end of the day, yes, we're in it together, but it's an individual sport when you step up to launch, and you're not feeling it and you launch, bad things happen. I try and cover that in the morning brief. I will also try and cover that during the launch process, but that's like, it is an important point, and I'm glad you brought that up because I did not cover that. Dimitri, does that address your point?
Yes. So let me add a quick thing to distract more. The part of my comment was that actually, if you observe the behavior of someone pushing the other, or the fact of the social pressure, you need to control it. So, you know, there's some people who, why I'm talking about, to give you guys background, I'm talking to my friends from the club in Russia, and I have a friend, she's trying to learn, but she had enormous social pressure from the other guys flying. And she had troubles. She's short and so on.
Yeah.
It was harder for her physically.
Yep.
She had enormous pressure from the other guys, up to kind of like semi-nervous breakdown, because they are all soaring and she's not yet.
Ah, okay.
And they are like literally not joking, but putting social pressure, and their instructors are not doing a good job of stopping them.
Yeah.
So that it's okay to be slow.
Yeah. So to me, this is a classic leadership problem, right? This is what we call a toxic leadership culture. So yes, you're correct. It is definitely whoever's in that leadership position, typically the observer, because you're typically the most senior person there, or the advanced instructor, to definitely put a stop to that. And I have never seen that directly, where people are like, oh, you know, you're just being a wuss and all that kind of stuff. That I've never seen that directly. I have seen a little bit where like, you know, you're overthinking things. There's a line between discussion and pressure, and where that line is very heavily situationally dependent. But you are correct in that it is very important to watch for that and make sure that that doesn't happen, right? And I'm sensitive to that because, as you know, I deal with a lot of small statured female pilots, and not so much to protect them, but I'm aware of some of these other social issues that they face, and I try and put a stop to it, because at the end of the day, like, it really is about you. Your only competition and your only opponent is you, right? That should be your only opponent, you and the conditions, really. And so if there's another factor that's causing you headaches in that regard, one, as somebody who's being led or is being supervised, you should speak up if you're facing that kind of pressure or you're facing those kinds of issues. But the other one is that the people that are supervising or leading you should definitely address that. Javier, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, what's the dynamic as an observer with the instructors in terms of communication and on following up? I don't know about the responsibilities that implies. Mm-hmm. Is an observer willing to work as teaming up with the instructor at some point?
So I don't know if there's a formal requirement for it. In fact, I know that there's no formal requirement for it. But what you'll find, especially here in the Bay Area, is that there are certain observers that like to work with certain instructors, right? And so that rapport is good because there's a handoff from the instructor to the observer. But then if there's any problems because the observer doesn't have a mandate to teach, like for instance, if I encounter a student that has some serious problems, I can make a sort of report to it and go, okay, and tell the instructor, hey, this guy or this gal needs to work on the following things. Now, like as an experienced person, I could fix those issues if I wanted to, right? But because of my organizational mandate, I'm not allowed to. And I want to give the instructor the opportunity to address those issues directly without having some third party talk to him, talk to the student directly about, right? Probably the only time I ever will overstep that balance is like in the moment where like it has to be dealt with right then and there, or we're going to have like some sort of serious issue, or if that student, and there are a few of them, where they're an orphan, they don't have a school to go back to. Does that make sense? And does that answer your question?
Yeah, actually that you went beyond, but the fact, like let me give you an example. I recently I did a trip to Big Sur to meet with another Hang 4 guy, and there was a Hang 2 guy with us, and the two Hang 4, we decided not to fly, waiting for conditions, and the guy was so desperate. I was able to stop him, but I'm not an observer. I'm nothing related to his pilot development. But I don't know how many of you have lost a friend.
Yes.
Flying.
Yes, and
flying.
I know the other end of this story. So, but continue, please.
I did lost two friends so far flying, and they were experienced pilots. Mm-hmm. And I'm always like being a dad for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I never been into getting myself into a position of being an observer or an instructor or anything. But I'm curious in that position that I was. I stopped the guy. Literally, I took him out of the harness. Like I had like a PTSD at that moment because the guy wanted to fly into a storm, into a snowstorm, actually.
Yep.
Later on, I learned that the guy was molested by his instructor by another situation, and then the guy he moved on into another instructor.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Yep.
And the guy is progressing. He has very good skills. But what I'm aware, it's how an observer is, that it's usually more out there than an instructor, because an observer not necessarily is doing business out of this.
Right.
And you're an observer. You can how is that? How can you influence to save somebody's life?
Yeah. So I mean, so like I said, I know I've heard that story from multiple perspectives. Pretty much I think everybody that was there, I've heard their perspective on, and I actually think you guys did the right thing. Okay. Well, obviously you did the right thing because I actually saw the video of the conditions. It was ugly. Okay. And the fact that you wanted to fly was like, what is wrong with you? Okay. That was my attitude when I saw like the video of what the conditions were like. So not only did you do the right thing, you definitely saved his life. And I think morally, how is that any part of a problem? I think you guys absolutely took the right steps to really save that guy's life, because he was borderline suicidal on that. But you know, the next step after that, like if I was in the same position, I would have done as you did. Okay. But then the next step after that is I would have written like a very detailed, dispassionate report to his instructor, like, yo, like you need to talk to this guy and tell him why this was a bad idea, right? Like explain in detail. Now, there's some other communications problems in that specific case, and yeah, he got paired up with a different instructor who seems to be able to communicate with him on the level that he needs. So it's difficult because you're going to have that. You're going to have people that you just can't communicate with. So there, it's important to recognize that and bring in other resources. But yeah, again, I think you guys did absolutely the right thing. And to me, like the temperament that you show there is what you want in an observer, right? You kind of are playing people's dad or older brother, right? To keep them safe. That really is the job, is really what it comes down to. So I think nobody would fault you, and I think most people would praise you in that regard, because I mean, I looked at that and there's no way that I would even consider flying in that situation. And the fact that somebody did consider flying into it means that they've got either screw loose or their education is suspect. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Surely. Thank you.
Yeah. Effects of stress on good performance. What I found is if somebody is experiencing an abnormal amount of stress in a given area, their normal performance will definitely take a hit. So I just had a situation where I launched somebody off the 1750 for the first time, and their launch wasn't that good. It wasn't terrible. It did give me a little bit of a heart-stopping moment, but they pulled it off and, you know, flew and landed safely. I would put that in the realm of like almost a close call, not quite what I would call a close call. But what we know is that this person is normally a very good pilot, and just that little bit of stress of something new is all it took for them to not perform at their best. So when you're dealing with people, make sure that you leave a good performance margin, right? You assess people very carefully, because people's stress level really affects like what their overall performance is. The next one I want to talk about is, if your instincts tell you that something is not right, listen to it. So if your instincts say something isn't right, follow them. You know, listen to your instincts. I've literally stood up on launch and had a couple of people launch okay. It didn't look like the conditions were that difficult. I did find out that the LZ was a little bit thermic, but not to the point that some other people at this person's skill level didn't handle it. So basically a bunch of other people landed before this person launched. And I just had a bad feeling. I don't know what it was. I couldn't tell you where it was coming from. And I was like, well, no, it's fine. On paper, they're okay. They've flown way more times than all these other people have from this location. So it shouldn't be a problem. And as soon as they launched, I knew I made a big mistake. I couldn't tell you specifically what it was, but I saw this person fly away from the hill and I was concerned. If you have a situation where you're just getting a bad vibe, you know, it's better to pack and be mad at you, because it's like, I tell you what, it was not that different from the first time you send somebody out to recon for unexploded ordnance, right? You don't know whether they're going to come back or not. And to be fair, that person ended up landing in a tree. Fortunately, no injuries of any kind. The glider was pretty busted up. That individual hasn't flown since. I think part of it was they felt that they were more ready than they were. And on another level, I was telling myself the story that like they've done this a billion times and everything was going to be fine. And it turned out that wasn't the case. So listening to your instincts about what the situation is very important. It usually means that there's a piece of information that you're missing that you can't quantify yet. If you're getting a bad feeling, listen to that bad feeling. As an observer, your job is to keep things safe. And if you get that wild hair that one day, you know, you don't have to explain it, at least not at the moment, right? If you're not feeling good about something, definitely listen to your instincts. They're trying to tell you something important. Oh, okay, last two. If you don't feel so good about somebody's gear, talk to them about it. If there's a question about it, don't let them launch. So obviously the tag there says Berkeley, so I'll name drop them. I took a Berkeley Club crew up to the top, and I had one guy whose equipment I was very, very, very concerned about, so I didn't let him launch. I made him pack up, and I told him in no uncertain terms, like, look, this is not about you. This is not about the fact that you did anything wrong or that you're a bad pilot. I am concerned about the airworthiness of this gear, and if you get different gear, I'll be happy to bring you up, right? But I did not feel good about that guy's gear. There were some bad wires on the glider, and there were some suspect things in the fabric that made me not want to let them go. And it may have been fine. They may have launched and landed just fine. They may have flown with that gear before. But the fact is, at the end of the day, if something happens, it's on your watch, right? It's your responsibility. And if you're not feeling good about it and you're taking responsibility for something, then by all means, don't do it, right? Inspect people's harnesses, look at things, make sure everything is good to go. If there's any doubt about it, pry it open and look, right? If you don't feel good about somebody's gear, don't let them launch. Last bit, it's best not to fly, at least when you first start. If you're going to be an observer, or you're going to be a basic instructor or advanced instructor, when you first start, it's good not to fly if you're going to be observing. It's good to take on a driver duty. And the reason why is because you're not worried about your own flying on the same day that you're observing for somebody else. So I actually literally had this situation. I had a pilot that was junior to me, and I wanted to make sure he got off the hill, and I didn't get off the hill that safely, right? I had a fairly notorious blown launch. So when you first start, if you decide to become an observer, don't fly the same day that you're looking after other people. Spend all your time looking after them, because if the back of your mind is concentrating on the own safety issues surrounding your own flying, you're either going to miss something that you're supposed to miss for the people that you're observing for, or you're going to get yourself in a bad spot. So don't do that. If the conditions are iffy, don't chance it. I've had multiple days on both the 1750 and the 600 where it's like, yo, the wind is not good. It's I'm not feeling good about how this is going. Let's pack it in. And I got a few side eyes. I got a few questions. I even got a little bit of anger. That is far preferable to carting somebody home in the hospital or having to clean up like their bodily fluids off either launch or the LZ, which I've done my share of. Fortunately, not under my supervision. Nobody wants to see that. You want to talk about post-traumatic stress? You watch a major injury happen, and you'll have that. So the best thing to do is not chance it. Okay. Video debrief if possible. So this is back to what I was talking about with Clark. You all know that I take a lot of video. It's not just for narcissism. It's so that we have something to look over and talk about after the process happens. And the other great part is for the new pilots themselves, you can actually go back, and if I typically will give people like a library of all the video that I've collected of them, and they can go back and look at what their progression is like, right? Brandon here is a good example. You know, I've kind of been working with him since day one in a variety of capacities. At least I've been watching him. So I have like from his day one lesson video all the way up till now, right? And so he gets to see his full progression. But then it's like you can spot problems. If somebody's launch isn't going well, their hand transitions are not going well, you have the massive opportunity, especially now where you can do slow-mo. You can slow the video down and see what the actual problem is and try and figure out what's going on. You can talk to them about where they are in their head at any particular moment and see what's causing this, right? Are they going blank? Are they trying to hold on? Are they gripping? Are they looking at the wrong spot? Like if somebody looks down at the ground on their launch run, or they're looking in the wrong spot on the launch run, like it's blatantly easy to see with video, where you may miss it in the moment. So here's a good example of Brandon launching. Pretty nice, right? You can see how the streamers are aligned. Everything is good. The windsock down at the 300 is correct, right? And if something goes wrong, it doesn't go right, then you have evidence and information that you can sort of draw out lessons from the problems that somebody encountered and try and avoid those problems in the future. But by the same token, if it goes right, then you don't have a lot to say, and it becomes a good memento. So as a recap, we went through me and my background, how I got here, what an observer appointment is and what their job is. How do you become an observer, what my operating principles were, what does a typical observer day look like, and we went through some war stories. And at this point, you know, it's 9:09. I'm willing to take questions as long as people want to keep going. So feel free to fire away if you haven't had something to say already.
Hey, Takeo, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of back on that war story thing, and then Javier's comment kind of let me think about it. So I don't know if it's too taboo of a topic to talk about in hand gliding, but you know, you did talk about, you know, I think a lot of people in the sport have experienced, you know, watching people have like serious injuries or maybe even worse. But I don't really ever hear like maybe what happened that we can learn from, or like what stage of the flight those things typically happen, or like, I don't know. I guess I want to use those as definitely like not a way to scare myself out of the sport, but to actually learn from, to make sure I can at least avoid that. Because a lot of times it seems like they tend to be more experienced pilots, you know, all sorts of levels of pilots. But you hear about experienced pilots that have these, you know, catastrophic issues happen. And so I'm just kind of curious if there is any kind of, you know, commonality and, you know, how they happen and how to avoid them.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know if I specifically am really qualified to talk about that stuff. I have seen my share of accidents. I've actually been a part of an accident chain at least twice on my own. But you know, what helps me is like, at least on the airplane flying side, I actually read a lot of like NTSB reports as to what accidents were, what caused them, what their accident chain was, and the like, what happens, what they could have done differently. And to me, that sort of helps me think about what I would do in that situation. And in terms of common theme, I don't know if at least the serious accidents that I've seen with experienced pilots, if there is a common thread. But there is one not a common thread, but there's one thing that comes out over and over and over again. That is like hubris. The story of Icarus and how he flies too close to the sun and dies for his presumption. That story exists in Greek mythology for a reason, right? The one case that I can think of, we don't know exactly what happened, but we know that there was probably something that was unwise that was tried, right? That the person in question did not leave enough performance margin to find themselves out of trouble. They tried to push the edge a little too much, right? And to me, I see people like that. I know somebody like that right now, where they love to push the envelope way too hard. I mean, this guy is pushing way too hard. Okay, and those of us who are in the military know, like that guy. What's the right phrase? Oh, So everybody who's worn stripes, who's been a sergeant, knows that young men are suicidal. Like they're by temperament, they're suicidal, right? And that doesn't mean that they're going to go and blast themselves in the head, although that happens depressingly often. But what happens is they push the edge, they fall over the edge, and that's the end of that. I'm sure everybody I'm talking to knows somebody like that, right? Especially if you're in hang gliding, you know somebody like that, right? Yep. So, you know the people in that, at least in that limited regard, the people that are going to get themselves in like severe trouble because they're pushing way too hard. Okay. The other ones, so to go along with that, and I don't want to indict comp flyers because they're just kind of competition is kind of a different phase on its own, but it's sort of along the same sort of theme, right? You're trying to push the edge and you're trying to make the margins and you don't leave enough safety margin and you can find yourself in a bad spot, right? That's also primarily why I have no real interest in comp flying, because I know myself. It's like, you know, in the moment, I'm like victory or death is a very serious thing in my family and my culture, right? So, but as for accidents, like the two ones that I can think of that I was involved in, one was I put myself in a bad situation because if I had planned out and picked the time and place of the battle instead of the time and place of the battle picking me, I would have been in a better spot, right? If I just made the decision to land earlier, I would have been in a better spot. The other one was purely a skills issue. So it's like I was flying in conditions that weren't that bad to begin with, but the fact is that my skills weren't up to the job, and that's where I found myself in trouble, right? So what I'm doing about both, I'm making the decision earlier to bail out of a bad spot, you know, pull the eject handle when you can still make the ejection, and then also making sure like my physical skills are really up to par. That's why I sort of personally spend an inordinate amount of time launching and landing, because I know those are the two most perishable skills and they're the most critical, right? So yeah, it's a difficult call. If you haven't seen Tom Lowe's talk on safety, to me, I found it really personally illuminating, because I'm finding like the times I see people get in trouble, it's almost always a conditions or a skills or a thought process problem, and we can always trace it down to that. As an observer, the problem is, the really frightening thing as an observer is that, you know, most of us, and especially anybody who's been in martial arts or been in the military, like we're cool if bad things happen to us, like we can live with it, right? But what you don't want is people that your friends or people you're responsible for meet a bad end because of something you missed or messed up on, right? And so, especially when you're dealing with new people and you're sending them off the hill, I mean, I would say it's more frightening than standing up there yourself. And if I run into any kind of situation where something could have gone better, I try and work my level best to make sure that it goes better the next time, right? So that we don't have these problems on a recurring basis. Does that answer your question or no?
Yeah, and I just asked that because, you know, obviously a little bit more of an experienced H2 now, you know, done some pretty different sites, different mountain launches, and, you know, just haven't seen anything crazy happen, but I've heard stories. I just kind of want to make sure I'm not one of those stories. So
yeah. Well, you know,
video, it's great. Yeah.
The good part about being a hang too is you're sort of in the fishbowl, right? You're in a small fishbowl, and you're kept in that fishbowl until you're ready to meet the wider world. But what I can tell you for a fact is like, man, the scary stuff doesn't happen until you become a hang 3.
Oh, goody.
Yeah, like I'm telling you, man, like the whole joke about it doesn't get easier, you get better is really true when you become a hang 3, right, Bailey?
Well, that. There was that one time I tried McClure at 3 as an H2.
Well, I wasn't going to bring anything specific impulses, and I didn't really mean to name drop you, but I saw you smiling back there, so I figured I'd put the spot on you a little bit.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so
I really appreciate how you and Clark are willing to say when I'm doing something like that as well. I hope more people are willing to speak up. Like, there's this culture of you don't want to make somebody feel put on the spot or bad or something, but like you're warning them, it's useful.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, here's the thing. Everybody has a responsibility for it. So if you're being observed and your observer is doing something screwed up, then by all means speak up. This goes back to the airplane concept of CRM, crew resource management. And I try and use crew resource management as much as possible. And that is you give everybody a voice, and like if there's something wrong, like speak up, you know, like if something is not going right, like there's a line twisted or somebody's about to launch on a hook, so by all means speak up. You don't want to be the person that you could have done something you didn't, and it didn't go well, right? So it goes both ways. It's just because somebody is ahead of you on the value chain or ahead of you in the leadership or responsibility chain doesn't stop you from doesn't let you off the responsibility of saying something when something is not going right. Okay.
Cool.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Takeo.
Yep. Next.
Yeah, I know confirmation bias is hard to see past, but like you had a bad feeling before somebody ended up in the tree. How often do you have a bad feeling and nothing happens?
I gotta tell you, let me see here. I gotta tell you, I've only really had that bad feeling once, where where nothing happened. Because after that incident, if I have a bad feeling, I put a stop to it right away. So it's like, I don't give it a chance to develop. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The more often days where you just early and people look at you annoyed, but
yeah, but that's not the hard one. The hard one is when it's like you know, it could be okay, it could not be okay, right? The 50-50. Carl had a lot to say about that, and when I have him, Clark, and Paul do their observer talk, I really want him to go over this, but he because he's sort of my mentor as an observer, he told me something interesting. He's like look, the power or the responsibility of an observer is to say no, right? And you have to be willing to be the bad guy, which is funny because it's like, you look at it, my military career has completely well trained me for that particular role, right? Like it doesn't bother me to be seen as the asshole, right? In fact, I actually consider, back then and especially now, I consider it to be my job, right? But I've had situations where it's like, it's a little rough, but I think it'll be okay. And I've had it go okay. I've had to go, it would be a little rough, and somebody had a scary situation. Not a bad one, and not anything that, like, there would have anything bad that happened, but like, you know, all it takes is somebody on launch to have that just like a little instant wing drop to give you the heart attack, right? So, you know, I've had a couple of those. But the bad feeling, rarely do I go, oh, well, it's going to be okay, and keep going now. Like, if I really have a bad feeling, I'll just put a stop to it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? I'm sure Clark has a lot to say, so I really want to hear what he has to say if you have anything to say, Clark.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I wasn't going to say too much since it's almost past my bedtime, but okay. I would offer the observation of one of our joint conversations with Carl about, you know, trying to not introduce new information with people that you haven't worked with before. The supposed, you know, the hang rating versus new information, which I'm sure you can bring up. And the other aspect is a thing that I call cognitive dissonance. This comes from GA. About decision making and the fact that one of the important roles that we play is to help the pilot in command make sound decisions for themselves while managing the risk envelope so that their decisions go well. Over.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So actually, I didn't want to get too much into that because I actually want you to get into that on your talk, Clark. Yeah, that's true. I will speak on helping people to make decisions. I had a situation where I had two people from Southern California come up to try and fly Funston, and it was just a particularly nasty, gusty, strong day, right? And these people had never flown a coastal site before. So what I wanted to do is make sure that they still got value because they drove up to fly, right? But there was an ulterior motive, and that was I was going to give them the high wind rope dance ground handling training that some of you have had. And what I really wanted them to do is feel for themselves whether they were going to be able to fly or not, right? And one of them was a young lady. She's a very, very skilled pilot. And she walked up to launch, tight hang strap, bar low to the ground, hands on the base tube, balancing the glider, and it's like 25, 30, right? And her eyes were like this big, right? And I was like, you know, I told her straight up, it's like, it's not a good day to fly today. And a bunch of other people did the same thing. They walked up and her buddy that were with her, it's not a good day to fly today. But it's one thing for me to tell you it's not a good day to fly today. But if you walk up there and your eyes get this big, it's probably, you know, that's a decision that gets self-made, right? So sometimes it's like, okay, in a permissive environment with, there's safety built into the process and I'm not going to let them launch. I wanted them to make the decision for themselves that it wasn't a good idea to launch, right? And so like, let them feel it and let them feel the icy fingers of fear closing around their heart, right? And they did. So to their credit, both of them did very well on the training and understood that it was a gusty, nasty, turbulent, holy, ugly day. The kind of the backside shear day for those of you who fly Funston. It was one of those kinds of days. So I wanted to make sure that they feel it. Yeah, in terms of skill level, the basic rule is if you go up, if you add anything new to the situation, you go down a skill level. So let's say, for instance, you're hitting 11 and you've got a brand new Sport 3 and you're a Hang 4. Well, boom, skill-wise, you just got bumped to a Hang 3. And vice versa, or not vice versa, but another level down. So if you're a 3 and you've got yourself a brand new double surface glider, boom, you should consider yourself back to being a Hang 2 again, right? And that's sort of the conservative approach. It's like the lower limits, the easier conditions. Anytime you add something new, you back off on the situation because you don't want to do two things at the same time, right? I'm sure there's a couple of you on here that I know have had that experience of trying something new in a difficult spot and find yourself in a difficult spot. So, but yeah, the details I actually want the senior observers to go through, so I'm not going to get into that or steal their thunder. Definitely stay tuned for that for when that comes out. That'll definitely be useful, especially for those of you who are looking to become observers. Anybody else?
Thank you for doing this, Takeo.
Oh, thank you. I hope it was useful. I was kind of wanting to do this as a time filler until some other people were ready. But I hope you guys all got some value out of it.
Oh, it was
great.
terrific. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It was great. Thank you very much.
I do have one more question, but maybe this is going to get covered in their talk.
Well, go ahead and put it out, and we'll talk about it.
Like, yeah,
go ahead.
Okay. I do want to become an observer. Like, I'm going to learn from you and Clark if he'll teach me. And who else? Like, do you have a list of these people? Yeah, actually, I have a couple. I've got a list of people that want to be both basic instructors and observers. So I know you've wanted to, so you're sort of on that list, and I'm working in the background to get you the seminar with Paul to get you signed off. Because yeah, I'd like you to. Not just because of the skill and some of the experiences that you've had. I think you'd actually be a good one. And on top of that, you learn by teaching, right? So it would help your development both as a leader and as a hang glider pilot. So I think it's a good thing to take on. And I encourage everybody, if you have the wherewithal, to do things like that. Take on instructor jobs, instructor observer jobs, because that actually makes you a better pilot. It makes you a better leader. It makes you a better asset to the community. Okay, anybody else? Final words? Okay, thanks for coming. This is being recorded,
and we'll post-produce it and put it up on my YouTube channel when we get an opportunity. And by the way, the last talk that Tom gave, the weather talk, is still being post-produced, so that'll go up as soon as we're done with that. And if anybody has ideas for topics or speakers, please send me a message and we'll attempt to set it up. If you guys want to talk about certain topics and you want to put together a talk, by all means, it's not just the senior people. Put something together and we'll talk about it. Like I'm sure our Legion has a lot to talk about as video productions. I really want to know a lot more about that, and I'd really like to see him talk about those kinds of things. So that's just an example.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for your time.
Hey, thank you, Takeo. Cheers.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Takeo. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Takeo.
Bye.